I've got one section all drawboard and ready to pin, and I'll show you what I did to that on this section. Here you can see the marking system where I struck these rails and stiles with a chisel, numbering them 1 and 2 on the apron, and the stretcher did that with a mortise chisel, and I'll do the same on this section with a carving gouge, so it'll be distinct, and I'll only have to count up to 2, because this is 1, 1, 1, 1, and then even here is overkill, but simple enough. 2 and 2. So that's that. I had knocked these together and got them the way I liked them. This one was a little less flat than the previous section, and I was able to go in, check those pieces with winding sticks and make it so that when I push down on that corner and this one, it can go flat. So then I'll rely on the side rails to really bring that into where it needs to be during assembly. So I just check that the shoulders are tight and take the awl and trace that hole onto the tenon and flip it around. This one, the apron, I need to make sure its top edge is flush with or in line with the top of the stool that's marked here on the stile. All that gets cut off right above here. And then mark this one as well, like that. And now knock things back apart. On large pieces like a chest, I might just back those joints open a little bit and leave it essentially assembled and bore them in place. Here it's easy enough to take the whole thing apart and bore them. So grab that and hold fast just to keep it steady. Now I'm going to set that bit in such a way that I'm going to drill this hole closer to the shoulder than what I lined out on it. And you're going to ask me how much closer, and I'm going to say just a little bit. Working the end aprons is much the same as working the straight aprons, the longer ones. They're just a little harder to handle because they're so small, but you pair the tenons the same way. The main difference is the shoulder is angled, as is the end of the tenon. The tops and bottoms of the tenon are still running parallel to the length of the rail. One thing, the bevel gauge, the adjustable bevel, not a bevel gauge, I set that on to a framing square and a straight edge, and this angle is a 1 to 6.5 inch slope, and you can see mine, it fell at some point, so I have a mark on the wall that I set that to. But at this stage of the game, I'm going to need this to cut the stretchers, so I'll just reset it to what the apron is. Tighten that up, check it there as well. And so when you do set your adjustable bevel, it is good to record that mark somewhere on a piece of wood, or I did it to a cabinet, just struck it on the inside of the door to a cabinet where I hang my axes. So I've paired most of the tenons. I have this one, the last one left, and it fits in the thickness, so it's a matter of, just as before, lining up its top edge with the top of the stile. Lean on that, scribe that line, and then saw that. So here I want to make sure I'm sawing at an angle following that shoulder, and it's just a couple of strokes, and then split that off just as we did earlier. So the further you go with these, the harder they are to hold on to, because they've got their canted ends. That I split a little bit out of whack there. Yeah. There we go. And I just want to make sure that that little stub doesn't go ahead of that shoulder. So this stub that I just cut. So I'll take just the corner of my chisel right there and take that out. Doesn't matter what it looks like, you just want it out of your way. And now again, set the stile here and test that thickness and that height. So I'm a little bit, my tenon is still a little too tall. And let's see if that's in the top of it. Which would be the easier way to fix it. So I'll brace that on the bench hook again. I know it's too long because I've not trimmed the end of it yet. I keep the ends at 90 degrees while I work them. The last thing I want to do is snip that to that angle. And I just eyeball that angle on it. So my top edge is a little bit long. It's running higher than the top of the stool, so I'll whack some off the bottom of the tenon. I can go in and fill with the mortise if I want, but it's easier to just take that, move. The bottom edge of the tenon doesn't perform any function in this joint. And that now is where I want it. So I will take the other section, flip it on top of these, and so now I'm sighting that those shoulders are snug. The tops of the rail line up with the top of the stool. A little adjustment on this one. So I'll get those set, and we'll look at draw boring, and then work to find the length of the side stretchers. So the next step is to show you how to find that the length of that stretcher there on the end. That isn't done in any at any point ahead of time. You do it here during a test assembly. So I've done this one. I have one to go, so I'll show you that one. Get this out of here. And one of the first steps is to do the draw boring on these joints. So I'll set up those mortise and tenons, get them just where I like those shoulders. I want them tight and in line here with the line that's the top of the stool. If this apron is high when you assemble it, then you've got to plane it down to that point, and that can be done, but it gets to be irritating, so better to take care of it beforehand. To mark out the joint, it's pretty simple. You assemble it and then just take a thin bladed awl like that one and just scribe. I scribe the whole circle on there, helps me see it, and then knock things apart. That joint is tighter than it might be, and then bore them. So this apron is worth looking at. It's as thin as it can be. Any more of that taper and it would compromise that tenon. You see there is no back shoulder really down here on the tenon, and there's barely any up there. So this was a piece of wood that just barely squeaked by to make that tenon. So I'll just grab this piece in the bench hook with a holdfast and use this brace and bit to bore these holes. This is 19th or 20th century bit. Goes by lots of names. The 17th century name for it is a piercer, and it's got a flute like a carving tool, but it's sharpened not at the end. It's a little sharp at the end, but mostly I work it here on the edges. That's what does the cutting right here. And you can sharpen either or both sides. You can cut clockwise or counterclockwise. There's no screw to draw things in, so you have to kind of lean on it. And as far as placing this hole, I've got my scribed hole that I just made, and I set the center of the bit near the edge of that hole, and I want to go toward the shoulder. So if this is the limit of my hole right there, the bit is just inside that. And then that tenon's only 5/16 of an inch thick, so you're through it before you know it. Here I've kind of wiggled down, and I can come by leaning the brace a bit, I can extend that hole back up this way. There's plenty of leeway for this. If you offset the hole too much, it's easy enough to open it up. There, I've done it again. And if you do the worst, which is to bore it in the wrong direction, bore away from your shoulder so that when you drive a pin into your joint, you open it up instead of tighten it up. Even that can be fixed by plugging the hole and boring it again. I've done that on this shop when we were building the frame of the shop. The very first joint I draw bored, I bored it the wrong direction. And so those will mostly do it. put this back together. And what I want is this test assembly, like that, to find that stretcher length. And these days, I tend to just put it together as is. It's a little bit canted right now, I can feel it. You can see it bouncing on the bench. But I can take care of that afterwards. But formerly, I used to use these, had to run and get them. You can put a temporary pin in to hold that in place. This one is just a crummy awl. For an awl, I don't like it. It's too stout, it's too blunt. You can always regrind the point, but for what we call a drawbore pin, it's fine. Jenny Alexander used to make them out of alignment pins that she would then put a wooden handle on. So over the years I got dozens of these in the mail, and so if you've got a couple of awls hanging around, you can do a test fit that way. Otherwise you could throw a clamp across it if you're inclined. You just want to make sure these don't move while you're working down here to set this this angle. And I want to just double check my adjustable bevel, and I'll mark out one tenon. I just eyeball 1.5 inches here, and eyeball and scribe that shoulder, and then carry it across the top and the bottom for now. You carry it all the way around. So what I want to do is set this piece right in place. I can lay it on here and sight down where that angle is, where that shoulder will be. But here, this piece is irregular on its back and it's not sitting flat. This plane might be canted my way. It is canted my way. So I do it on the edge. I know that top edge is straight and that it will sit correctly. So I'm eyeballing that point, which is the beginning of that shoulder, right on the corner of the stile where the mortise is. I unfortunately have some damage to my stile right there. That's the worst possible place to have a ding. Something hit it. But you can still see where it's supposed to go. So I set that, and then I want to slide this one so that its top edge is right at that same point. That's the top corner of that mortise. And then you double check here, and you lean on this, and I just make a mark from that point into the waist. And that shows me where to set my adjustable bevel. And then scribe that shoulder, and again carry it across the top and bottom, and then I double check it, because if this is wrong I can plane that off and begin again. So I set that there, sight this where it needs to be, and that looks good to me. You can double check it with this dimension at the bottom, at the bottoms of the mortises. Now you can't see that because it's on my side of the business here. I flip it around, and it's just a hair long. But I might be able to force those feet up. Oh, look at that. Those have enough slop in them that I can pull them out a bit. So I think I'll go with it. It's a little bit different than the first one I cut. When you're living right and making a joint stool, they're both exactly the same. But this one, oh, it's considerably different. What's that? That's almost 3/16 of an inch. It is 3/16 of an inch. So that's why you make them one at a time. Because if I'd cut them both to that short length, they wouldn't work. And this will all be knitted together when you drive the drawbore pins. It'll all work out. It's disturbing to some people that that stretcher and this stretcher are unequal, but once it's a joint stool over in the corner of the house, you won't even notice. So off I go.